And iterative skepticism is not really a position. It's not a position. It's merely a posture. And I think that's important to remember. It is a posture. It is a way of posturing oneself, but it is not a position. Now, there are other forms of skepticism, however, that have been offered as things that we should take seriously. And in fact, there have been arguments that have been given for these forms of skepticism. I want to talk about these in general categories. The first type is what I call differences in the depth of skepticism. Differences in the depth of skepticism. Now, by depth, I mean differences in how certain the skeptic is that skepticism is true. Indeed, in the time of Christ and in the period between Aristotle and Augustine, the two schools of Greek skepticism actually differed over the depth of skepticism they employed. Let us consider the skeptical thesis. Let's call the skeptical thesis Thesis T. And let's let T be the thesis that no one knows anything. No one has knowledge. Right? And that's T. So the skeptic says T. No one has knowledge. Now the question becomes, do we know that T is true or not? Now, what is called unmitigated skepticism, I don't mean to just throw fancy terms out here, but that's the term that's used to refer to it. The unmitigated skeptic was the person who said that he knew that skepticism was true. He knew that we couldn't know anything. The mitigated skeptic was the person who said we can't know anything, and with regard to thesis T, whether or not we can know anything, I don't really claim to know it either. Okay, so that was a skeptic that suspended judgment about everything, including the skeptical thesis itself. Now, I think it's pretty clear what to do with the unmitigated skeptic who claims that you can know, you can't know anything. And this is, I believe, one of the things Augustine did was to point out their own inconsistency, or in modern terms to say that that form of skepticism is self-refuting. Now, do you know what you've heard a little bit about self-refutation? Maybe I could just clarify what it is for something to be self-refuting, if this would be helpful to you. Statements are about a subject matter. The statement, all dogs are mammals, is about what subject matter? Dogs. The statement, Kansas City should have beaten the Broncos, is about a football team, the Kansas City Chiefs. That's a true proposition, by the way. Okay, but we can debate that later. I have some reasons for it, though, I tell you. Okay, a statement is about a subject matter. Now, sometimes a statement is about a subject matter, and the statement itself is a part of its own subject matter. For example, I could make the statement that all English sentences have been uttered since the year 1000 AD. I don't know if that's true or not. But that would be a statement about what? All English statements, including the statement itself. Now, if a statement is about a subject matter, and the statement itself is a part of its own subject matter, and if the statement makes itself false, it's self-refuting. So the statement, or proposition, or if you know a little bit more about that, whatever you take on that. But the statement, there are no English sentences longer than 3 words, is self-refuting, right? The statement, I can't utter a single word of English, is self-refuting. Now, obviously, the proposition that I know that no one can know anything is self-refuting. The weaker claim where someone adopts the view that no one can know anything, and about the skeptical thesis itself, I really can't know it. I think what you can do is begin to generate an infinite regress. And I'm not really right now trying to talk about how to deal with the skeptic. I'm just giving you some initial considerations. But I actually had a conversation with the son of the head of the philosophy department at UC Riverside when I was doing my master's degree, who went on to do a PhD at Columbia University. And he was a skeptic, or at least purported to be one. And so we were walking to the library one day, and I began to ask him, I said, I've been told that you are a skeptic of some sort or another. Is that right? And he said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I am. And I said, well, I'm puzzled by this. I said, do you know that skepticism is true? And he was smart enough to say, well, no, I don't know that skepticism is true. I think it's true, but I wouldn't be willing to claim to know it's true. I said, okay, that's fair. Do you know that you think it's true? Well, and he was smart enough to say, no, I think that it's true. Well, do you know that you think it's true, or do you just think it's true? And this was getting long, and of course, and I said, it's a short day here, and we can't go forever on this. I said, look, if you don't even know that you think it's true, then I don't think that you're clear whether this is your position or not. And until you're clear that it's your position, then you shouldn't be advocating it. And once you do think that this is your position, then you'll at least know something. Now, this is not a trick. This is not meant to be a trick. The bottom line is this: you can't reasonably doubt anything unless you know something. You can't reasonably doubt anything unless you know something. And what I was trying to get him to see was that if his skepticism was going to be something that he claimed was that we all ought to accept, he had to start by at least knowing something. Even if it was only the contents of his own consciousness, that would be at least something he'd have to know. Now, the differences in depth of skepticism is one way of dividing skeptics. There is another category that's called differences in breadth. I've talked about iterative skepticism. I've talked about positions that differ in the depth of skepticism, and now I want to talk about skeptical positions that differ as far as breadth is concerned. And there are what are called local and global skeptics. Local and global skeptics. A global skeptic is skeptical about everything. He or she claims that we don't have knowledge about any area of the intellectual life. I don't know your backgrounds. I don't know how many of you have had a little philosophy or not, but when I use the term knowledge, there's also a skepticism against what's called justified belief that isn't against knowledge. And if you're not familiar with the distinction, don't worry about that. I'm just going to keep talking about knowledge here, things that we claim to know. The global skeptic says that I'm skeptical, or we can't have knowledge about anything, and he could differ in his depth about that. But that's a breadth concept. He could be certain, he could claim to know we can't have knowledge about anything, or he could claim to be tentative about whether we can have knowledge of anything. A local skeptic is someone who limits his or her skepticism to one area of the intellectual life. So, for example, someone might claim that we can have knowledge of the external world by way of our senses. I can know a podium's here because I can see it, but I can't have knowledge when it comes to ethics. So there would be a case where someone would be a local skeptic. They would limit their skepticism to, say, ethical claims, but not employ a skeptical stance, say, with regard to sensory knowledge of the external world. Now, the trick for the local skeptic is to keep his or her skepticism from spilling out into other areas. Because the reasons that justify skepticism in a local area can quite easily spill over and infect the rest of his claims elsewhere. So these are some basic types of skepticism now. And let me just give you some arguments that have been advanced for skepticism. There are a number I could give, and what I'll do is I'll give these two, and then I'll stop and I'll open it up for questions to see if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. But let me give you two arguments for skepticism that have been offered in the history of philosophy. And the first argument from skepticism is from the fact of error and fallibility. Error and fallibility. The idea here is that we have, in fact, been mistaken many times in things we thought we knew. For example, a person sees an oar that's in the water and it looks bent to him. And if he just went by his senses, he would say, this is a bent stick. Or railroad tracks appear to us by way of our senses.